Well, there's a lot in China on the book, and I mean, there's a big section on Russia and Ukraine. There's a big section on the climate scam. There's a big section. Imagine that might not go over too well in Australia, but again, it's got 200 footnotes. So I'm always open to debate, but go read a lot of the primary sources, and one can draw your own conclusions. But there's a lot on climate change. There's a lot on Ukraine. There's a lot on China. And rather than recite it all, just if you ask me to put it into kind of one headline, China has peaked. They're a nation in decline, economically, financially, demographically. This notion that the 20th century was the American century and the 21st century will be the Chinese century is just not true. China had enormous growth. One of the greatest, longest stretches of compound, double-digit compound growth in the history of the world. So there's no denying that. But they were rising from low income to middle income. It's a much tougher deal to get from middle income to high income. They haven't mastered that yet. Very few countries ever have. And it's you need a lot more than China has right now. But that failure to make the leap to high income from middle income status comes at the same time that their population has begun a steep decline. And the thing I love about demographics is you can actually know exactly how many 40-year-olds are going to be 20 years from now, because they're all 20 today. I mean, there's an actuarial mortality component, of course, but that's not that hard to figure out. And so demographics is an area where you can do some very long-term forecasting with a high degree of accuracy. And China is on track to lose 600 million people in the next 70 years. By the end of this century, the Chinese population will have dropped from 1.4 billion to perhaps 800 million, maybe even lower. And if the simplest form of GDP is how many workers do you have and how productive are they? It's like a two-factor model, but it equals nominal GDP. How are you going to run that economy if you're losing 600 million people? And the answer is you'll be lucky to survive in terms of the regime, but that's just the beginning of it. There are all kinds of consequences. That it gets worse. They're not only is the population shrinking, but they're getting older at the same time, which is highly correlated with Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, cognitive decline, and the need to assign caregivers to the elderly, which means they can't do other kinds of work that might be more productive. I had lunch in Korea, that was a few years ago, with the former assistant finance minister of Japan, Takeshibara. He was known in the 80s as Mr. Yen. He was the yen guy, but distinguished retired policymaker in Japan. And I said, we all know the demographic situation. China's had 9 recessions since 1989, continued depression, deflation, et cetera. And I said, how are you going to get out of this? Or what are you going to do about it? And he said, well, what you're missing, Mr. Rickers, is, we have a lot of declining statistics, but the population is dropping even faster. So on a per capita basis, we're better off. And the truth is, you go to the Ginza and, the lights are on. There's, the theaters are open, the stores are open, et cetera. So I said, okay, so let's just play this out. So 50 years from now, there's one person left in China, but she owns the whole place. Is that kind of what you're saying? I don't think you saw the humor in that, but that is the path that they're on. In terms of wealth, that'll get you through the night, but in terms of output, not so much. These are the kind of outcomes you see when you have these demographic catastrophes. It sounds obvious. People kind of roll their eyes and say, well, the key is diversification. And people go, well, of course, diversification. Everybody knows that. It reduces risk, increases return, efficient frontier, blah, blah, blah. But people know that in theory, and it's a cliche, but they don't understand what diversification really is. And when I say that, let me give you an example. I run into people all the time. They go, oh, yeah, I'm diversified. I own 50 different stocks in 10 different sectors, semiconductors, consumer non-durables, et cetera. And I look at them, I say, you're not diversified. You may have 50 stocks in 10 sectors, but you have one asset class. It's called stocks. And when you don't need protection, there's a little bit of idiosyncrasy, but when you most need protection, they're highly correlated. They all, in stress, they all go down together, or they can rally together. But the point is, you're not diversified at all. You're betting on one asset class. So what's real diversification? Real diversification is dividing your portfolio among multiple asset classes. So have some equities. Yeah, have a slice of equities there. I really recommend energy, because it's been beaten down by the Green New Scam, and yet we're not going to do without it. I can, if you understand anything about physics, you can understand why. And so those stocks are going to perform very well over the long term. Certainly mining and minerals. I recently invested in a lithium mine. I have investments in a gold mine. But there's, whether it's strategic metals, precious metals, or anything going into electric vehicles. I've ridiculed the climate change, the climate alarmists, and rightly so. But it doesn't mean that their policies aren't going to prevail. I mean, just because they have really dumb ideas doesn't mean that they're not going to get traction. So, I happen to know there's not enough lithium in the world, above ground, below ground, brine, prospects, proven, whatever. All the lithium in the world is not enough to make more than about 10%, probably less, of the batteries that the greenies claim they're going to produce, so the whole world has electric vehicles, even though they're charging up from coal-fired energy plants. So lithium is going to go up. That exploration is going to go up. The whole thing will end badly from the electric vehicle point of view, but at least for some years, that demand for lithium is there. Titanium, aluminum, other strategic metals that are necessary for aircraft and a lot of other manufacturing. That's right. Not to mention the battery. Battery life is about 8 years. So you're going to be buying a $30,000 battery on your $70,000 Tesla every 8 years. You could buy a new car, but they're going to be buying batteries. And no one will want them used because you got to buy a new battery. So that's one sector.